If there's one thing the boomers and the millennials agree on, and there seems to only be one thing, it's an obsession with the 1950s. Now, the boomers have this idolatrous fixation on it because it's their childhood, and of course, that's the only time in history that actually matters is when they were children. When they were adults, life wasn't as magical, and the millennials, they have an obsession about it because it's such a part of the ancient past that they can't imagine anything that happened before it. Just a minute ago, I was reading an article about talking the old days of farming when farmers farmed with tractors that had two row implements, and you made the money back then, and that's how it was in the good old days, which lasted basically. Now, I'm told the tractor outnumbered the horse on the average American farm in, I believe, 1959. So, a lot of your really famous antique tractors, you got your K-Cells, you got your John Deere, um, GPs and stuff, you got about a 30,000 unit production run of those. Now you get the 9N Fords, the N series, you get about 1 million of those built from 39 into the 50s. Then you have a lot of tractors, the two-row tractors that they love so much. They were built in the 1940s and 1950s, and once you get in the 1960s, then you start getting the bigger machines. But what these people don't seem to understand is prior to the Bessemer steel process in the late 19th century, most of your implements were wood. Most of your people were farmers. Most of your farm implements were wood. 40 acres and a mule was a legitimate farming operation. And this is how it was basically since the fall of the Roman Empire. Before that, you had some larger collective farms. In fact, there's archaeological evidence of a device called the Gallic Reaper. Basically, this is a two-wheeled cart which has basically the knife from a sickle bar. They think the originals were made out of captured Gallic swords. And what you would do, you would push this up to your wheat field, and then you would use basically a 2x4 on a broom handle to shove the heads of the wheat into it, and you would collect the heads off because in Gaul, this is Germany now, you have a hard winter and the stuff will rot in the field if you don't get it. And this is how they farmed the field. But once the Roman Empire fell and they broke up the villas and estates, they could no longer maintain the infrastructure to keep this heavy equipment, which is basically a serrated blade about 3 feet wide, in operation. Now, the deal with the good old days in the 1950s were when America had the good common sense to be in a country built far beyond the reach of Nazi bombers when the rest of the world had a large part of their industrial base destroyed, and so we had money and industrial capacity, and we were doing pretty good. We didn't have a big war debt. Okay, we did, but, not compared to everybody else. Everybody else seemed to owe us money for some reason because we'd been bailing them out or liberated them or something. And so that's the only time in history that we care about. We don't care about the 1930s, the 20s, the 10s, of the late 19th century, the early 19th century. I don't even think we know that happened. Colonial times, that's just guys walking around at Colonial Williamsburg, I guess. We don't know what else they did. We didn't pay any attention to that. And there was no history between that and the Pilgrims. It's just about 160 years that didn't really happen. And we sure don't know what happened between the Pilgrims and Christopher Columbus because we know nothing about that history, that 130-year period or whatever it was. And before that, we have no idea how the economics were done, of how people did things for the 1,000 years before that. It's just kind of annoying because the 1950s, that's the decade that matters. That's the good old days. The one dot in history we actually care about. We don't know what we're doing now. We don't know what we're doing in the future. We don't know what we did in the 80s or the 70s or the 60s, but the 50s, that's what really matters. Because that's what's important.